Welcome back. This is the tutorial for the Rowena Zippered sides. This is an add-on for the Rowena Handbag pattern that released back in July. It is now September and we're here for these zipper sides. So this is the Rowena, this is the minimalist version. You'll see that most in testing because it was just, we were focusing on these side panels and the minimalist is just so much faster across the board. So the zippered sides are very simple. Essentially just unzip it, it stays unzipped, or you can zip it back up and that's how it will be. It is pretty secure, even if you're pulling on it a bunch or when you open the bag and you're fully expanding it, that's when you're going to open that zipper a little bit. But unless you're doing excessive force, it's not really going to open all the way. So just keep that in mind. It is pretty sturdy there. And some of you may recall that this was actually supposed to be released about a week ago, but some of my testers had mentioned to me at the end of testing that they were a little uncomfortable with the waviness that they were experiencing in their zippers. I actually hadn't experienced that. I'll show you the first bag that I photographed that was the original pattern photos for the add-on pack. So that would be this one. And you can see I don't have a wavy zipper there. It does have a swoop, but it wasn't contributing to any waves that I would have tolerated, to be honest, and I hadn't experienced it before then. So I went back to the drawing board. I kind of just kept making until I replicated the issue. And one of them was this shape. So in the version that you have, these angle straight out, but in the original one, they went in a little bit, and that contributed to this zipper tape pushing down. And I'll show you what happens once you do that. So if I just point down on this zipper tape a little bit, let me see if I can do it. You see what happens. Those coils have nowhere to go but up, and that's where they will go, and then it can contribute to a wavy zipper. So I was able to figure out part of the problem, but that wasn't it fully. And so again, I had to make a few more testers, and I just wanted to take a minute here to talk about, you know, wavy zippers, what I found contributed to them and what I found kind of worked against them. And then hopefully you can take that information and use that for not only this minimalist or for the Rowena zippered sides, but also for other bags as well. So the first thing I want to make note of is that this is considered a concave zipper at this point. It's going in on itself right there. And I had noticed that when I was actually designing the Aries, one of the things about concave zippers is that when you are sewing your seam and where the coils are two different radiuses, right? They're two different measurements for a curve. And so if you're using a larger seam allowance like we do on these zipper sides, then this is only a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. You are kind of lengthening that space between those two curves. And really, this performs best if it's if it can be reduced to the proper size curve that it needs to be. But it doesn't always work out that way. And you can't remove these coils. And you have to calculate in seam allowance. So you just can't remove them. Normally you need to adjust the design to work with the coils versus make the coils work for your design. I have seen people say, oh, it's a wavy zipper, steam it, starch it, it'll get rid of it. If it's wavy on the sides before you sew it, absolutely that can help. But if you already have sewn it on and it's wavy, it really doesn't do anything at that point. It truly does not take out the excess coils because that's essentially where wavy zippers are coming from. It's when there's too much pressure being put on that length of zipper, and what's happening is it's kind of pushing it in or scrunching it a little bit, and it causes it to buckle, and that buckling gives us the appearance of waves. It's because there's so many coils and they just have nowhere else to go. And that can also be created by a change of tension too. You know, if you're sewing your seam allowance and it's not straight, you're kind of making it tight here and loose here, and that transition can cause tension differences, and that can contribute to a wave as well. If you aren't basting first, you know, and things become askew, that can contribute as well. But also, it can be different materials. So if you're sewing something that's thicker, and let's say I had a woven lining here that was very lightweight, and I didn't stabilize it to kind of be close to what these outer sides are, then maybe that change in thickness is going to cause changes in tension while I'm sewing and stuff like that, which can also pucker this tape and contribute to that coil not being nice and flat like we want. For this bag though, I essentially contributed it mostly to that size, but know if you have a very lightweight zipper with a lot of other things like inconsistent seam allowance, inconsistent stabilization between your pieces, you know, you weren't being very exact with your placement, your tension was too high on your machine while you're sewing your zipper on, all of those things can show wavy zippers, and all of them are going to be exacerbated by the fact that this is a slightly concave zipper. So just keep those things in mind when you're sewing it. It is a very fast sew, these side panels, but just make sure that you are following the instructions and being exact as you can for the best results. This was inspired by the Adina from Sewing Arts or Sewing Art Z. I'm not sure exactly the pronunciation on that business, but it is a beautiful handbag, and I love that she did side zippers on it. And it was after I released the Rowena, actually it was 2 days before I released the Rowena, that I was like, man, that would be really nice. And so I figured it out, and here we are. So thank you so much for that inspiration. Hopefully you guys like my version as well, and hopefully it works for you. It is a fairly simple process. It's pretty fast. It's not as fast as the original Rowena side panel of just a panel with the 2 magnets on there, but it is absolutely still functional and still pretty simple, and works really well with the minimalist or the full Rowena. So I've already done the prep work here. That's simple. It's very similar to how we do the side panels, where there are 2 layers of woven interfacing with a stabilizer wedged in between. That helps kind of soften that fold there, but also provides structure down at the bottom, and make sure everything stays nice and stabilized. And you're going to find that stabilizer on these 3 bottom pieces, but on this top center, you're just going to have 2 layers of woven interfacing. Now, I definitely recommend doing the interfacing as called for in the pattern. I know that there have been a number of people who have skipped that, or done a single layer of woven, or who have done other stabilizer options. I have also tested various stabilizer options, and this is the best. This is the combination that I found that have given the best results, so I highly recommend it. But if you happen to choose your own interfacing and stabilizer options, please know that your results may vary. You'll also need some number 5 zipper tape. I give you the length for that in the instructions. Make sure that you also are curving these top edges just like you do in the zipper placket for the Rowena. I give you instructions on that, but the method that I have you do it kind of incorporates this overall length. So if you do it differently than me, you may need to kind of not cut your zipper tape first, do those corners, and then cut it to the length that I give you in the pattern. So once you have trimmed your zipper tape, I want you to apply some double-sided tape along these angled edges of your side center. You should be about a ½ inch from the bottom and about 3/4 of an inch to a full inch from this top edge right here. It's not really a big deal if you go further than that. It's just we're trying to make sure that we at least cover the area that the zipper tape will be attached to. So then we're going to take our trimmed zipper tape and we're going to place it right side up on top of that side center. And we're going to get it as evenly aligned with that bottom edge right there as we can. Take your zipper tab, and then you want it to have that non-interfaced edge down there align with those other 2 bottom edges, like that, and clip them all together. You can apply double-sided tape here if you want. I don't. I don't find that I really need it all that much, but you can if you want to. But once it's all clipped together, you're going to sew this edge using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Be careful as you're going over those coils, but otherwise make sure you backstitch well, and then we'll continue on. So I have sewn that seam using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and keep in mind that this is the only 3/8 inch seam allowance in this whole add-on, okay? The Rowena, almost all of the seams are 3/8, but I kept these sides here that we're going to sew on later at a 1/4 inch so that you have more space of the zipper on each side, right? So that it isn't overly stretched or overly loose or anything like that. So just make sure that this seam right here is sewn with a 3/8 inch, and that's the only one in this add-on that is sewn with that. When you're done with these side panels, you can go back to the 3/8 inch like I call for in the Rowena pattern, but only make this one 3/8 inch. So once you've sewn that seam, we're going to do some trimming, of course. And so we are going to kind of angle from the center to the seam here of just this zipper tab seam allowance. We're going to trim it at an angle, just like that. And we're going to do this for both sides. So we end up with a kind of point like that. And then if you want to, I put this as optional in the pattern or in the add-on, but I like to also go back here and do this shape. And it kind of lines up nicely with the coils and the other trimming that we did when we put it all together. So I kind of give space for that bulk to go to when I fold it all together like that. It's just a little less bulky, whereas I would have a further bulk with that excess seam allowance there. So it's just more bulk reduction. And leaving that point there versus trimming it just across here, like say using an 1/8 of an inch, protects your zipper tab exterior from your coils here. Because over time that can wear down and we don't want that. So that kind of gives you that protection, and then everything else kind of reduces that bulk. So as you've probably guessed, we're going to top stitch here using an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So once you have top stitched that zipper tab seam, we're going to remove these double-sided tape backings. Then we're going to unzip our zipper as far as it will go. And we're just going to take this edge right here, and I like to lift up this bottom as I go so that it kind of puckers out a little bit right there. And I'm going to align it with this edge. And then I press down to secure my zipper tape to my double-sided tape. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So again, I'm kind of just putting my finger right there to kind of lift up that bottom edge or that bottom corner, and then I'm just smoothing it out. And what you're going to see is that your zipper tape is going to do this little bulge down here. That is essentially unavoidable because this is an angled edge and your zipper pull is pulling them in. And so that's okay. When we sew it, it's going to get tacked down and it won't cause any issues with our finished side panels. So just make sure that you're not pulling, you're just allowing this straight edge of the zipper tape to align with this straight edge of the side center, and then you are good to go. Once you have done that, I want you to baste these edges here using a little bit over an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're okay sewing through your double-sided tape, absolutely feel free to use an 1/8 inch, but if you want to avoid it, just use a scant bit more than that. So now you're at this point where you have basted your zipper on. I only basted on the tape, I didn't baste anywhere else because it just wasn't necessary. I like to lay out all these pieces here so that we understand kind of how things are going to get laid out. So we'll have our left panel, the center panel, and the right panel. Now I'm going to start working on the left panel, and then when I'm done with that, I'll work on the right, and then we'll top stitch everything. So I'm just going to put this aside now so that you understand that I'm only working on the left and the center for now. So for this process, I do like to use a stapler. I just find it to be a lot more exact, and that's always what I'm going for. And when we do zip the zipper out of the way as we sew by it, it's just more of a stronger hold than something like clips or 1/8 inch double-sided tape. So the first thing I'm going to do is I like to just turn this on its side, and then I like to take my left panel, place them right sides together, and I'm gonna staple along this straight edge here. And I am aligning these bottom edges as well, just like that. Okay, and then I'm gonna staple that. Now, if you are using a stapler, make sure you're stapling as close to 1/8 of an inch as you can. You don't want to go more than that. Again, we are only using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we don't have as much wiggle room as we would if we were using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So then we're going to take this angled top edge and we're going to match it with that top edge right there, like that. And then we're going to staple above this zipper tape, okay? Just should be, if you're stapling or clipping, it's only going to be 1 to 2 of either. And so then we have this kind of weird angled piece like this. And that's what we're going for. And it's going to bow slightly. That is okay. So then what I do is I kind of push this bottom corner down with my thumb. And I get this to align just like that. And then I'm going to staple starting, or clip, starting at the top and working my way to this corner. Once I get to this corner, you're going to see that it happily kind of nestles in there like this, and that's what I want. I'm going to kind of encourage it to do what it wants to do. And again, it's going to cause it to have this kind of bowed shape here, and that's okay. Because when we open it up, it'll go where everything needs to go. And so then I am going to sew this edge from this bottom all the way to this top edge right here, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. As I go over this change from just 2 layers to that folded zipper tape there, I'm going to be careful of those coils. And as I'm down here with this zipper tab, I'm going to also be careful as I'm sewing over that. When you are sewing near to your zipper pull, leave your needle in the down position and then just zip it out of the way. Reposition, make sure there are no puckers underneath of your work depending on which side it is that you're sewing from, and then continue on down. So as you can see, I've sewn that 1/4 inch seam allowance there. Once I get to this corner, I kind of pivot and sew down this straight edge. Now you'll see that the interfacing down here on the zipper tab is closer to your seam than up here in the side center. And that is by design. That is so that this can more freely move behind and forward without any interfacing kind of wanting it to bunch forward in ways that we don't want it to. So it just kind of forces it to go where we want it to go a little bit more willingly. And down here we want everything to stay as structured as possible. And so having it a little bit closer to the seam helps in that. And so that's why that zipper tab is a little bit tighter than the other sides. And also we're going to be top stitching this down, so you will get that additional structure from the top stitching that's not needed on those outer pieces. So in case anyone had that question, there's the explanation you didn't ask for. So I'm going to remove those staples, and then we're going to do a little bit of snipping, and then we're going to repeat that process and attach the right panel. I can never go unscathed. So the snipping that we're doing is going to be on the center and on the zipper tab only. We're not going to make any snips on this left panel. And we're going to snip about 3/4 of an inch from this top edge horizontally into that seam allowance. We're not going to cut our stitches or anything, but we're just going to cut as close to them as we can so that we can comfortably open this up like that. And then we're going to do again the same just on that zipper tab seam allowance. About a 1/2 inch up from the bottom, we'll snip horizontally into that seam allowance so that again when we do top stitch, this is what our end result will be, which gives us a much less bulky seam to top stitch over when we're attaching the side panel. So it would be, this is how you will sew it, and this is how you would have sewn it. And this just kind of helps even things out a little bit. So I've made those snips and I'm just going to let them be for now. And then again, I'm going to align that right panel along this bottom straight edge here and then up top, and then ease it in here to the zipper tape, staple, and then I'm going to sew that seam using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I have both panels sewn. I have this zipped up right now, but everything is attached. And so now I need to do my snipping, and then we're gonna move on to that top stitching. So just so that you remember to do it, I suggest clipping open your snipped sections. So I've clipped those snipped sections open, and I just want to show you what we're going to be doing. So we're going to start top stitching right here on this top corner, or on this one. I like to start with this one because I'd like to use the right side of my foot. So I'll start here, tack it down, and then I can use the right side of my foot as my seam allowance guide. For these other folds, I'll continue down here and then go back up. And again, still using that right side of my presser foot. Whichever side you want to start with is totally fine. It's the same process no matter which direction you're starting from. But you want to tack down that snip section, and you want to top stitch the rest of that seam allowance down to these left and right panels. Okay, nothing is getting top stitched to the center panel. The only thing that's happening is that that excess seam allowance that we snipped is getting kind of tacked down facing the center, but it's not being stitched down along that center panel, right? So our only top stitching is on the left and right panels. So again, we're going to start up here, go down, keep these snipped open, go across the bottom, and then go back up. And then end by tacking down that snip section up there as well. It's a pretty simple process, and once you're done with that, you're essentially done with your panel. So I'm going to get this one top stitched, and then I will show you them together. So there is the second side panel done. And then you can use your pattern piece to trim this if you need to, depending on how well you cut, how well your seam allowance was, if you had any shrinkage during your fusing process, if you followed the edge of interfacing your stabilizer versus the edge of your material, if your thread was thicker or thinner, all those things can lead to this not being the most exactly precise side panel, right? It's pretty close, so just clean it up as you need to. Won't be an issue. I hope that was a nice, quick, and simple and easy add-on for you. I hope that you like your Rowena with the zipper sides. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at knottedthreadsco@gmail.com. That is truly the best way to get your questions answered. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and happy sewing.